Okay, this is from my book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes. We're going to talk about T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was really born an American, sort of as a Boston Brahmin, and he then went to Harvard, then he went to Oxford, and he converted to being British from England. Okay, although he's from a rich family originally, he grew up around St. Louis area, like the Mississippi River. There's a couple interesting things about him. He made his name Stearns like a middle name because he didn't want his name without that middle name to spell backwards the word toilet. He knew Latin, Greek, French, and German. He could read the literature in those languages. So he was a true scholar. When he was young growing up, he had bilateral inguinal groin hernias. And because of that, he really couldn't play sports. He was a little bit of a wimp, a weakling type, if you will. And he just spent a lot of time reading, so he had a lot of knowledge in his head, and he was an intelligent guy. He described his life as being like Dante's Divine Comedy, that his earlier days and his early poems were like hell with the wasteland, then purgatory, and as he got older, like heaven. And I jokingly would say, my life's the opposite of that. It started out as heaven in high school. You got all this time on your hand. You don't have to work. Your parents are paying the bills. All these beautiful girls that want to experiment at your high school. I mean, it's as good as life gets. You're free and time for love, okay? And I was an athlete, too. Everybody likes athletes. Later on, I became a scholar. Everybody hates real scholars. So, as you can imagine, my life just got worse. Marriage to my ex-wife was hell. I mean, it's not that bad. I'm kind of kidding. But anyways, let's see. What's next about T.S. Eliot? He was, part of that whole expatriate, the lost generation after World War I, writers in the 1920s and 1930s. And I think for the most part, they're all sort of part of the development of modernism in art, modernism in literature. And I think for the most part, they stink. Okay, there's some exceptions, and there's a few good things about T.S. Eliot. I really don't like his poems too much. The Wasteland, what is that? J.S. Prufrock. There's like weirdo, sick, alienated, wimpy crap, all right? But deep down, there were some good things about him. People were, confused and frightened by the devastation of World War I. All these good young men wasted for no apparent purpose, okay? The idea of an individual hero like Achilles or Odysseus making a big difference in the time of automatics, it was like, it was the end of all that. That's no longer the case. So what do you do? How do you reassert your individualism? It was the near suicide of Europe. Okay, and then you look at these guys as contemporaries, like James Joyce. Even though he's Irish and I want to like him, I just think he stinks as a writer, okay? Ulysses is unreadable, and, Finnegan's Wake's even worse. He had a few good points, but he's an alcoholic. I don't have much respect for people who are alcoholics. It's like you're given one life, and you want to waste your life just giving yourself brain damage? I mean, that's stupid. Okay. Hemingway, I like the fact he was a brave guy. He did some good things in World War I. He did some good things in World War II. So I liked his bravery. I like all of that. He's a Midwesterner. All of that, I credit him. But in the end, he was an atheist, and his life was his writing was meaningless. Yes, he developed an interesting style with, lack of adjectives, and it's real sort of fast and macho, but he really doesn't have much to say. There's nothing with Hemingway that sticks with me. When I talk about Dostoevsky, I think about trying to be like Alyosha. When I think of Charles Dickens, I think about Scrooge turning things around in The Christmas Carol and appreciating life. Okay, I think about Les Miserables and Jean Valjean being a great man and the bishop enabling him to become a great man. I have those stories etched in my mind, but with Hemingway, it was kind of like, yeah, you go watch the Bulls. Who cares, okay? My brother recently went to watch the Bulls, and I said, I don't want to go watch the Bulls. To me, it sounds like a waste of time. And he said I was a wuss. I'm like, oh, no, I just don't see any purpose in going to watch the Bulls. And then he says to me, yeah, well, I go and do things. You just write about stuff, but I live it. He says, you want to go see the Vatican? I go, I'd like to, but I can't. I have to work too much, okay? I'm short-staffed in my group. I got to work a lot this summer. And he goes, you're a wuss. Okay, so anyways, enough of that. What else? Hemingway, we talked about him. Fitzgerald. Great Gatsby was a very good book, but he was also a wimp and an alcoholic. Virginia Woolf was insane, stupid moron, destroying herself. Picasso was a piece of crap. Cow, you know what, moon, then you know what comes next, east. Okay, I much prefer like a heroic individual, somebody like G.K. Chesterton, who wrote like, "Oh God of earth and altar, bow down and hear our cry. Our earthly rulers falter, our good men lift and die." I forget that one word, but I like Hilaire Belloc, C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, contemporaries of them. Somebody who's trying to make life better, not somebody who's just whining and then writing all that chaos. T.S. Eliot described himself as a classicist in literature and an Anglican Catholic in religion. He thought that Western civilization was in decline. He loved Aristotle and Dante, and in a sense, in his own way, he was trying to preserve what he could of Western civilization. And that's what I like about him, that he was basically a wimp, a weakling, but he was trying to be stronger. He had a tough life. His wife was crazy. He was a little crazy himself, but he was sort of fighting to become a better man, and I like that. He was very fastidious. He worked in a bank to make a living, writing initially done just as a hobby. First of all, I'll just show you an example of his poetry so you can see how sort of weak and crazy it is. And it was hailed as this wonderful new style, but I actually think it kind of sucks. So here it is. We are the hollow men, the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas. What kind of crap is that? It's like degrading yourself. That doesn't get you anywhere. The only reason it got him anywhere is because at that time, with his generation, that type of nonsense was celebrated. But in reality, that doesn't do me any good. That doesn't say anything to me I want to repeat. And here's just one more of his poems from The Hollow Men. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Okay, there's some truth in people becoming, gutless wimps and stupid, but again, still you see there's not much there. Some of his literary criticism was better. Like, here's the next couple lines I think are much better. Now we're getting to something useful. He said, "If you will not have God, and he is a jealous God, then you must pay your respects to Mr. Stalin." And that's the exact truth. Because, basically what else is there? It's like, Gottfried Leibniz had said, there's either God or nothingness. And once you surrender to nothingness, you basically say, whoever has got the might, the power, the dinero, whatever they say goes, okay? In a Soviet country, the ruler can just say, hey, I want your wife, I want your daughter. There's nothing you could do. You have to give your wife or your daughter to them. They own her. The people are just livestock. You don't want that type of society. That's what you have if you don't have God, okay? And you can wiggle your nose and wiggle your finger, but that's the truth. There is no moral foundation. There are no rules without God. Without God, the idea of man is created in the image of God and therefore part divine, and we should respect the individual, not abuse him, treat him fairly, give him his right to privacy, property, and everything else, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it says in the Declaration. If you don't grant that, then you basically say might is right, atheistic Darwinism. And rulers always want atheistic Darwinism because it lets them do whatever they want. It lets them declare themselves to be gods like the old Roman emperors. This is so obvious. To me, I always wonder, how could people not get that? The average stupid person I meet thinks that the world and the system likes them and is trying to help them, whereas the world and the system considers them vermin and is not going to help them. Somebody who destroys your water and your food supply and your air pollution, they don't like you, okay? I mean, I don't know why that's so hard for the average person to figure out. Once you realize the system's not out there to help you, then you learn that I've got to get my act together to help myself, or life's going to be difficult. Okay, T.S. Eliot continues. The world is attempting to form a civilized but non-Christian mentality. The experiment will fail, but we must be patient in awaiting its collapse. Meanwhile, redeeming the time so that faith may be preserved alive through the dark ages which are before us. Yeah, 1930s, we're heading into the 1940 chaos, the plunge, the Soviet, show trials and all the other nonsense. And basically, Christianity is what makes good stuff. It makes your good art. It makes your good sculpture. It makes your good buildings. It protects the little guy. The little guy is the one who benefits the most from Christianity because it says he's worthwhile. He's not just a low-life vermin, okay? Versus atheistic Darwinism says the little guy is nothing but vermin. He's just a farm animal to be disposed of, okay? And if you don't agree with that, that means you don't know very much, okay? That's basic, all right? And, okay, a little more T.S. Eliot. So what T.S. Eliot is basically saying, take your pick, God the Father or Big Brother, okay? Another T.S. Eliot poem. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring, will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Okay? Only those who risk going too far learn how far you can go. If you aren't in over your head, then how do you know how tall you are? Yeah, you got to challenge yourself. T.S. Eliot. The very existence of libraries affords the best evidence that we may yet have hope for the future of man. Yeah, I think libraries are much better than the internet. I'm very sad to see so many libraries going over to digital, getting rid of so much of their books or their audiobooks even, because once you put everything on the computer, Big Brother, all they have to do is push a button and they can delete everything. I've seen a lot of Christian songs deleted off the internet. You don't want that, okay? The more that continues, the more we'll be pushed into slavery. I mean, it's so obvious. That's what's so sad. It's like I go to the grocery store and I see that over 99% of the toothpaste has F- in it. And it's like, oh my God, the public is still so clueless. That was obvious 25 years ago what a disaster that stuff was to put in the toothpaste. And if, they don't learn, it's like we still haven't learned. 100 years ago, they figured out diabetes is caused by high-fat diet. And that's still not widely known, And that's why, you teach, you do the best you can, but it's kind of scary how little the public knows, okay? T.S. Eliot continues, most of the evil in the world is done by people with good intentions. Yeah, all the low, functioning proles, they just get talked into doing all kinds of bad things, and they'll just pick up whatever slogan comes along and do whatever terrible things that come along just because it was a slogan of the moment. They don't think very much. T.S. Eliot continues, I learn a great deal by observing you and letting you talk and taking note of what you do not say. Yeah, that's sophisticated conversation when what you're going by is you recognize they don't say the stuff that the nice people say. The people who like you always say and do. That's how you can tell somebody doesn't like you. If somebody starts acting weird around you, that's a good sign that they're planning to do something bad at you or they're quite mad at you or something, so pay attention to that. T.S. Eliot. I love reading another reader's list of favorites, even when I do not share their tastes. I am provoked to compare, contrast, and contradict. It is a most healthy exercise and altogether fruitful. T.S. Eliot. An election is coming, universal peace is declared, and the foxes have a sincere interest in prolonging the lives of the poultry. Yeah, that's about right. Okay. Okay, T.S. Eliot continues. The majority of mankind is lazy-minded, incurious, absorbed in vanities, and tepid in emotion, and is therefore incapable of either much doubt or much faith. Okay, so men dislike being awakened from their death in life. Yeah, you see that a lot, Okay, T.S. Eliot. Anxiety is the handmaiden of creativity. Yeah, you've got to be upset about something to want to create. You have to be motivated. You have to have a burning desire to generate the energy it takes to do a unique, original piece of work. It's not easy to generate that energy, so you've got to have a strong purpose. Okay, T.S. Eliot. Some editors are failed writers, but so are most writers, because he was both a writer and an editor. T.S. Eliot. When a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for his work, it is constantly connecting disparate experiences. No poet, no artist of any art has had his complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation is the appreciation of his relation to the dead poets and artists. Tradition cannot be inherited. If you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. It involves, in the first place, the historical sense, the sense which compels a man to write not merely in his own generation, in his bones, but with a feeling that for the whole of literature of Europe from Homer onwards, and within it the whole of literature of his own country, has a simultaneous existence and composes a simultaneous order. This historical sense, which is a sense of the timeless and the temporal together, is what makes a writer traditional. Yeah, so I like that in him, a respect for the classics, because, it's like if you want to be good at anything, you got to study what did the people do who went before you. Okay, so if you want to be an artist, you got to study the great painters that went before you and their painting. If you want to be a great writer, study some of the great literature that went before you. Whatever it is. And if you don't do that, your art's going to stink. And that's why all the modern art is fake. It's the emperor's new clothes, because it's all nonsense. A child could do it. There's no skill in it. And all the wimpy college professors try to pretend it's real. And that's because they're fake, okay? Somebody who's real. And it's also why another thing, too, I like is that T.S. Eliot never really had an academic job. He was working in a bank or something else. So he was not your pure academic. And he kind of said what he thought. Versus if you look at most college academics, they're a bunch of total wimps. You know, they'll all these art critics, and you'll see them at thegreatcourses.com, the famous art critics and the famous art books, they'll sit there and pretend that modern art is real. As soon as somebody tells me modern art is real, I completely lose respect for them. I can't take them seriously anymore. Because they're obviously lying. And you know they're obviously lying because they're a wimp. So, and that's like Schopenhauer had said, all the best books are written by amateurs, because the amateur writes because they like the thing. Con amore, versus the professional just does it because it's a formality for the job. So they're going through the motions, and their books are usually half-assed. Okay, Eliot continues. The more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers in the mind that creates. Okay, so what he's basically saying is in your own personal life, you have a lot of ups and downs and sadness. Like his wife was crazy, was put in a mental asylum. He had his own difficulties and a nervous breakdown. But he had to separate that from the part of him that was able to create and do some type of creative work. To do the useful thing, to say the courageous thing, to contemplate the beautiful thing, that is enough for one man's life. Humankind can handle very little reality. Culture may be described as that which makes life worth living. Okay, now here's some things that kind of get to T.S. Eliot and who he really was. He said, more can be learned about how to write poetry from Dante than from any English poet. The language of each great English poet is his own language. The language of Dante is the perfection of a common language. So yeah, what he was saying is, this is a guy who read Dante in the original Italian and loved it, okay? So he's a pretty smart guy. And he sort of felt in many ways that European culture had declined its progressive loss of faith since Dante. T.S. Eliot, back is the way forward. It is the sound of poetry that does the poem's work. The meaning of a poem is just the hunk of meat that robbers use to distract the dog while they burgle the house. The mere meaning of the poem just distracts the reader long enough for the sound of the poem to do its real work. Distraction by meaning gets the mind to allow the entry of the sound with all its power. Poetry began with the savage beating of a drum. Success is relative. It is what we can make of the mess we have made of things. So anyways, T.S. Eliot has a few good qualities. I do like the fact that he pointed out you can't have Christianity without Christ, and you can't have a nice top-notch society where everybody's welcome without it. Yeah, you don't need to be a Christian, but if you don't have Christian ethics in society, things go in the garbage can because they become all about money and power. And when it's all about money and power, only the few at the top of the money and power have it good, and everyone else is, crushed beneath. So anyways, I hope that was interesting or helpful.